Alliance for Children is a child advocacy center. When law enforcement or child protective services believe a child is being abused, the child is brought to the Child Advocacy Center, a safe, child-focused environment. Pinwheels have become a national symbol of child abuse prevention, and Alliance for Children proudly displays the pinwheels outside their front door. Without a CAC, the child may end up having to tell the worst story of his or her life over and over again. At a CAC, the child tells their story once to a trained interviewer in a way that does not re-traumatize the child. A main focus of CACs is having a child-friendly environment. As you can see, the lobby of Alliance for Children has a lot of toys and books that would be fun for any child.
For this project, we interviewed Samantha Torrance, a forensic interviewer for Alliance for Children. She spent 1 year as a community educator and 4 years as a forensic interviewer. Samantha has her bachelor's degree in history from TCU. For her job, you don't have to be licensed, but you do need to meet certifications.
So every day what I do is I interview kids who are potentially victims or witnesses to any kind of abuse or violent crime as requested by CPS or law enforcement. And my job's just to gather as much information as possible so that the investigators can determine what they're going to be doing with the rest of their case. An average day is probably 3 to 4 interviews, and then monthly per interviewer here in Tarrant County, monthly we each do somewhere between 30 and 40 interviews a month. Prior to forensic interviewing being a thing and being something in the field, children had to be interviewed when it came to the criminal investigation and the civil investigation. And that meant that kids were needing to be interviewed by all these different people. So they were being interviewed over and over again about the same traumatic events. Unfortunately, what was happening is not only were these kids being re-traumatized multiple times, but they were also, their stories were changing, because every time you talk about something, it's going to differ each time somebody talks to you. And so in order to help minimize the trauma on these kids and also ensure that the most accurate, consistent information was being gathered, children's advocacy centers and forensic interviewing was developed. And so we go through lots of training, including training on child development and question typology, and just the general dynamics of child abuse, so that we can be the best person to talk to that child about what they potentially have been going through. So oftentimes as a forensic interviewer, I do testify in court. It depends, how the outcry came out and what exactly is going on in the case will determine how I testify in court. In some scenarios, I testify as an outcry witness, which is when I actually get to talk about the child's statement. Most of the time I testify as an expert witness. And in those scenarios, I talk about the forensic interview process. I talk about child abuse dynamics. I talk about how the forensic interview plays a role in the criminal and civil investigations. Lots of other stuff related to those things. And then, yes, the children, you almost always have to testify in court. So we always record our interviews unless there is some kind of malfunction with the equipment. Our interviews are going to be recorded.
These are the rooms where interviews are recorded from. Law enforcement and CPS watch the interviews and can signal the forensic interviewer if they need to ask follow-up questions to the child. The interviews are recorded so that they do not have to interview the child more than once, because that can be re-traumatizing and children's stories can change more times the story is told.
Why did I decide to become a forensic interviewer? That's a hard question, because I don't think it wasn't ever something like I knew about or that I really wanted to do. I started working at Alliance for Children as a community educator because I loved working with kids, and Alliance for Children does a bunch of stuff on campus at TCU, and so that's kind of how I learned about the organization. Applied, sent in my resume, and started doing community education, just educating in schools to kids and professionals and adults in the community about child sexual abuse and body safety, things like that. Had a really great supervisor who allowed me to get a better understanding of how the whole organization works. So I got to observe forensic interviews. I got to learn more about our development program. I got to know some counselors. So I got to know kind of the ins and outs of how the organization worked, and was really drawn to forensic interviewing. I really liked how the forensic interviewer got to have that one-on-one connection with those kids, got to be like the one and only person who really got to be that person to listen to and hear all of kind of the deepest, darkest secrets that these kids are having to go through. And then also get to form those relationships and those bonds with different investigative partners, and get to know kind of how prosecution worked and how law enforcement worked and how CPS worked. Just all of the different kind of relationships that forensic interviewers get to build. And as I became a forensic interviewer, I really learned how awesome the education portion is. I went through so much training, and I'm still going through so much training, learning all about different things that I never would have learned about as a history major or as a community educator, learning about things like psychology and child development and different things that I never would have learned about before. And the field is so new, and it's still growing so much. There's always new information, new research, new adjustments to our protocols. So there's always new things to learn, and that's a really cool thing about the job that I've definitely learned, that I've really enjoyed as I've been a forensic interviewer. First of all, just for the state of Texas, you have to go through at least one, to work in an accredited children's advocacy center, you have to go through at least one nationally recognized protocol training. We actually go through two here. We go to one in Minnesota called Corner House. It's a week-long, 40-hour training that we go through and learn all about child development, question typology, all those things that I've been talking about, to learn the basic, the Corner House protocol. Then we also go to Austin, where we learn the CAC Texas protocol. In addition to doing both of those things, in Tarrant County, we go through several months of in-house training, and we watch. I mean, you get sick of watching interviews. And before we actually do an interview, we also do mock interviews, it's also a requirement to do mock interviews at those other nationally recognized trainings. And then we do more mock interviews here in the office. And then even once we start doing interviews, our supervisor or director or one of the other interviewers is going to observe us until they've given us the go-ahead to start doing them on our own. And so I think I was probably observed for 3 months before I actually was allowed to kind of do them on my own. I've gotten a lot of really good experience testifying in court. It's one of my new favorite things to do. It's still super nerve-wracking, and I get super nervous when I do it. But it's a good challenge. It's different from my normal day-to-day of just talking to kids. I feel like I've just grown in my general knowledge and understanding of this field and general child abuse dynamics, and I feel very confident in what I do. But it's knowing all that, and that I've grown, and that I have a lot of confidence in myself, and that I really understand what I'm doing. Knowing all that, but also knowing that there's always more to learn and there's more ways to grow, I think is a really cool thing about the field. Sometimes you just have hard days. Sometimes whether it's that you had to do, back-to-back interviews, or it's just that the content was really hard, or that you only did 2 interviews, but they were really long, really exhausting interviews. Sometimes that can be really challenging. Trying not to take that stuff home. Trying not to get burned out, or, just feel like you're at a point where it's just you're exhausted and you're sick of doing it. That's definitely always a challenge. By talking to other staff and other partners, and just, whether it's with some of my coworkers, it's going and getting lunch, or, hanging out after work just to kind of talk about the week. Sometimes it's not talking about it. Sometimes it's going hanging out with people that you work with and not talking about what you did all day. I haven't been great at it, but I do like to run. Running is a really good way for me to kind of relieve some of the stress and some of the, just kind of decompress after a long day. It's really high in CPS. I don't think it's as high in children's advocacy centers. A lot of people come from CPS to work at children's advocacy centers. As a forensic interviewer, like I said, I've been here as an interviewer for 4 years. We just actually calculated this the other day. Our forensic interview program has been around for 10 years. And I think there's only been 4 interviewers in the 10 years that have left. Mm-hmm. The rest of us have been here either since they left or even before then. Well, not to brag, but I do think I have a pretty good just general rapport with kids. I always have. I've been very fortunate that it's really easy for me to connect with kids just on a personal level. But you don't always connect with all kids. I don't. There are definitely some kids who We just don't connect. The way that we try to, though, no matter what, is the first 10 minutes of the interview is building rapport. And that means talking to these kids about what they're interested in, about what they're doing at school, about how things are going at home, easy things for them to talk about, and really engaging, being that active listener. A lot of these kids don't have anybody who's actually listening to them about this stuff. Teachers, parents, they ask them questions, but they've got a million other things going on. So to be that active listener, to be, solely focused on them, giving them, the what are they called? Like the facilitators, like head nodding and okay, and tell me more, like things like that. Just being an active listener sometimes can really help, and showing interest in the things that they're saying oftentimes can help kind of build that rapport and help them feel comfortable. So we build rapport, we exhaust all the questions we can possibly think of about any kind of allegations that we're there for. And then we always end respectfully. We always want to make sure that these kids end the interview by talking about something that is more positive, something to get them to stop thinking about maybe something traumatic that we were just talking about. So in the most appropriate, non-leading, non-suggestive way, gather the most accurate information possible. And sometimes that means there's no information to gather. Sometimes that means gathering the fact that nothing did happen to this kid. Honestly, it's not my job to determine whether or not this kid's been abused. I don't mean to say that I don't care if they've been abused or not, but I want to know. If you haven't been abused, I need to know. If these allegations haven't actually happened, I want to know. If they have happened, then I also want to know. So my job is just to gather all the information I can possibly gather, and ideally that it's accurate information, so that no one is wrongly accused, but also if something did happen, then something can be done about it. It's a hard question to answer because I'm not the one that determines whether or not it's a false allegation. A better way for me to be able to answer that is that not all of the kids that I interview, not all of their cases go to court. Not all of their cases get filed. It may be because the detective didn't believe the kid. It may be because their accusation wasn't strong enough. Maybe because there was no evidence. It may be because there's just, maybe it didn't actually happen. I couldn't give you a number. I don't know how often. Because I also don't always know what happens with the cases. Depends on the age of the kid, and it depends on the allegations. The younger the kid, the shorter the interview. Kids under 5 can't stay in the interview room for longer than like 20 or 30 minutes. They have no attention span. So those interviews are usually much shorter. Older kids, teenagers, especially if you're dealing with something that's chronic, or maybe you're dealing with a kid who's been perped on by many different perpetrators, those interviews can last upwards to an hour or more. My average interview is probably anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour. There's definitely times when I feel like the way we phrase it is that maybe a kid's minimizing, or they're still in a denial phase of the disclosure process. And there's not a whole lot we can do outside of just telling the detective, like, hey, look, because of some of the things she said, and because of the way she was, some of her body language was, and her reactions to some of my questions, I have some concerns that maybe, she's not ready to talk, or maybe she did say some things, but I'm trying to think of a more concrete example. Like a kid who can give you these amazing peripheral and sensory details about an incident, but then says that nothing happened. They just happen to remember that they could hear a door creak open and shuffling of feet and exact body positioning and exactly where everybody was, and it was something that happened like 5 years ago, but nothing else happened. I might be concerned that maybe they're minimizing and just not really wanting to talk about any actual contact. I'll just tell the investigators that, and then we send the kid to counseling and just wait. And if the kid makes an outcry to a counselor, then we can try interviewing them again. But there's not much I can do because, again, it's super important that I am unbiased and I'm not asking kind of leading, suggesting questions, and that if the kid's not ready to talk, I cannot make them talk.
At this point, Samantha is happy with the work she's doing for Alliance for Children, and in the future, she hopes to become an educator and potential supervisor for CAC.